This is the Soundfackery podcast from Soundfackery Productions. Doing it wrong, but doing it anyway.
Hello, this is Steve Kilpatrick, a.k.a. Soundfackery, and I'm here with Dr. Anikó Toth.
Hello.
And our special guest,
Mike Sizemore.
Hello.
Mike Sizemore is a writer. He's involved in a really diverse bunch of projects. Perhaps people best know him for working with John Carpenter and Sandy King for Storm King Comics. Mike, how would you describe what you do?
I just write stuff. I try and say yes to things I haven't done before. And I've just kind of stumbled through, I won't even call it a career. Stuff lands in front of me and I play around in whatever that thing is, and it's been lucky enough to lead on to other things, I guess.
When I was trying to think of intros for you, I was thinking Mike Sizemore, Imaginer.
Dreamweaver.
Because in many ways, you sort of came in as an ideas man first. Is that right?
It depends how far back you go. I mean, I wasn't writing much at all. I was reading an awful lot, and I wanted to do a master's degree, and some things happened that allowed that to kind of fall into place. And I ended up working in a bookstore in London. The bookstore had a staff recommends section that I kind of used to look after, so I did most of the reviews on that. When it came to leave that job and do something else, some of the customers asked me for more recommendations after I left. And I ended up setting up a website. It was my first website, was just telling people, what to read, the stuff that I read. From that website, I started doing reviews and getting paid for them. So I did a couple of different book review websites, and that led to more kind of like magazine style stuff. And I did that for a few years. The idea stuff probably just came because I was working with development companies. I mean, I'm jumping forward about 10 years now, but I was lucky enough to find a company that was still paying for development stuff. So we would just throw ideas around. That, again, sort of led into comics because we ended up doing quite a few just to create some IP around some TV projects that we were trying to get off the ground. And all that kind of turned into me ended up writing screenplays and that's all led to where I am now, doing a mixture of that and comic books, I guess.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's never boring, so that's good. And I don't have a boss as such, which is not. I've kind of been writing freelance one way or another now for probably like 15, maybe 20 years.
And what are you working on at the minute?
The way the comic stuff works is, I'm saying we just finished a book, but I finished writing it a little while ago. But the last issue came out at the end of last month, early this month, I think. Yeah. So that was a sequel to a book from a couple of years ago called Vortex. So that's all done and dusted now, although we just found out it's coming out in a trade paperback later in the year, I think in the summer. That's what I have been doing, and then I've just started writing some stuff that now won't appear until much later in the year. I finished a short comic book story that my artist that I usually work with, Dave Kennedy, who you know, is drawing at the moment. But that's only about 6 or 7 pages. So again, I finished that last year. And then the two big projects I'm working on now are a brand new thing for Storm King. And I'm also taking over writing what, I guess it was the biggest book they did when they started. It was a book called Asylum, the first book that John and Sandy did together a few years ago. And Sandy asked me last year if I would come on board as co-writer with her. So we just started. We've done one issue of that. So I'm just about to start on the second one this month. So yeah, good fun.
Is that a very two-way thing with Sandy? Is it collaborative, or how does that work?
It varies from project to project and the length of them. If it's something that I've come up with on my own, it's more of a traditional pitching process where I have an idea and I run it past Sandy on to make sure that I'm on the right track and make sure that it fits in with their brand. Then the other way we do things is they have an idea and ask me to come on board to help either flesh it out initially. And this works in TV and film as well as the comic book stuff, because I've worked on the whole slate for them, which has been very cool, very fun. Yeah. But with something like Asylum, that was initially a TV project, I believe. So they've been working on that for quite a while. So they know exactly where that was going and where it needs to end up. And this arc that we're doing now is putting the whole thing to bed. It's building up to the big finale. So I had some ideas of where to take the characters from where Sandy and John had left them off. It was just making sure that what I had in mind fitted in with their overall arc and wasn't too different from the previous issues. And then Vortex, again, was an original idea of John's. We worked out together exactly where that was going to go initially before I started writing. And the same for the sequel. We just had a get together to work out if a sequel was necessary, if it was wanted, if there was still an audience for it, and we decided that there was. So it was just taking some of the characters and just taking them in a slightly different place to see what happened to them.
I haven't caught up with the sequel yet, but I did read the first one. There's some bits where you go quite a bit further, really, than what a lot of people are used to stomaching in sci-fi horror.
You think?
I don't know anybody who had a cancer monster before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's part of that is like looking at the stuff online that makes you feel a bit queasy. Yeah. And then how you can make it a bit, more interesting and kind of visually fascinating, I guess. I mean, it's not gore for gore's sake, The monster in it, I guess, was people a little bit like a sleeve, so I can see where the Thing connection comes in, and a lot of people say that. But it does different things to the body. It's not trying to imitate them. It's when it's discovered, it's just how do I get from here to there in the most efficient way, or how do I kill this person in front of me in the most efficient way? So yeah, I mean, there is quite a lot of body messiness in it. But most of that is the fault of Dave. He draws the damn thing.
Well, we're going to catch up with Dave at some point and ask him about that. But what I liked about the cancer monster, he's actually a character. He isn't just a rampaging beast, is he?
All of the little monsters that I make have these little kind of. So sometimes it doesn't make it fully into the book, but I know the history of them, and I have little nicknames for them and stuff. There's one in the new one who is he's sort of made up of eyes. is interesting. I don't think Dave actually enjoyed drawing that guy, but I named him in the script because he's a scientist. I think, if I'm remembering it correctly, he gets kind of contaminated, and he just becomes eyes. So his name in the script is Dr. Oculus, and I shortened that to Doc Ock.
Nice.
It's nice. If you do Vortex 3, could we expect a monster made entirely of horses?
Oh, just to annoy God. Just legs and hooves. Well, I don't know. I mean, we're not even talking about a Vortex 3, and it would. To be honest, when I got to the end of Vortex 1, I thought that we wouldn't be coming back. I didn't really see a way from that point, and I feel the same now. But it's that never say never thing, If I do anything again in that universe, it might be more of a spin-off, just taking the surviving characters and doing something completely different with them. Because again, the fun I have with Dave, because it's a little bit like when I work with you. We grew up watching the same stuff, so we've got the same kind of cultural touchstones. So people pick up on all the sci-fi references, of course, but when I'm talking to Dave about what I want to get on the page, our references are everything. So there's the spaceship stuff in there. A lot of it comes from like Burt Reynolds movies and car chase movies. That might be interesting to kind of just take some of those characters down it'd probably still be a sci-fi horror route, but we'd probably move away from all the tentacles and body horror and maybe do something slightly different with them.
I mean, you just brought up that we do know each other.
I think you should talk about how you guys re-met. That's quite an interesting story.
That's Steve's story. He's the internet stalker, not me.
Well, yeah, there was a bit of that. But what's quite funny about that, because we have collaborated a few times, but what some people might think it's a little bit odd. We're chatting to a writer on a sound music thing, but our relationship was really forged in school through kind of a mutual outsider situation, both being metalheads in a school of normal people. Or idiots, as you might call them.
It was, it was, I mean, we were young. I was like, I don't know, 15, 16 when I met you? Maybe younger?
Yeah, you must have been young. I was the year ahead and still in school, so I could be 16 max. So you were 14, 15, yeah.
I just got into that stage where I'd realised everyone around me was an idiot. But you were supposed to stay with your idiots. You were supposed to stay in those groups that you'd known. And it was through music, because I got into heavy metal, and I suddenly had nothing in common with the people that I was with. And all it took was someone wearing the same patch on a denim jacket, or, starting to grow their hair out when they were not allowed to in school and stuff. Suddenly you had something in common with someone you'd never really met before, because, again, you being a year ahead, I think I was aware of you, but I didn't really know you. I think we already had some mutual friends probably. But it was just the music that brought us together. I mean, we were even in a band together for all of 5 seconds. But
we were. I remember you reminded me of that band rehearsal. I think in your old blog you actually wrote about it. You mentioned about how you stopped playing the bass and started writing reviews of our future gigs.
Well, I couldn't play the bass, but I could write a review of us playing Long Beach in California, even though we were in a church hall somewhere in the Northwest.
Yeah, I seem to remember playing Motor Breath a lot.
Yeah.
I think that was the one that maybe all of us could play at the same time.
Is this a song that you've written called
Motor Breath is a Metallica song off the first album, but it was the easiest one to play off that album, I think.
We did write a song together called We're Going to Eat You.
And to whom was that addressed?
That, I think, was inspired by the Incredibly Strange Film Show, which is the other place where we sort of came together, wasn't it? It was Odd Films. Yeah,
anything that Jonathan Ross liked, we already were aware of. So that show was great because it just confirmed that we weren't alone in watching Jackie Chan films and schlocky 80s horror. So I think that brought us together, the music, the movies. Yeah, I mean, all that very early stuff kind of kept us together and until we discovered the opposite sex. And then we never saw each other for 18 years.
That's pretty much a good summary of what ended the first phase of our sort of relationship, wasn't it?
Yeah, girls in university kind of pulled us to different parts of the country, I think, and that was it. Because I didn't have any interest in ever going back home, so I kind of stayed as far away from that place as I possibly could. So it was a nice surprise for you to email me out of the blue the way that you did.
That was a sheer stroke of luck. I found a badly sketched, well, not badly sketched, a haphazardly sketched picture of a man with a Lemmy-style beard that was called Mike, and I thought that might be you. And I emailed that person, and it was you. And then we actually found out we'd collaborated on something. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we both won a paperback book from The Guardian. It was a competition to finish a short story that had been started by
Michael
Moorcock.
Called Crowning the Kitten.
Oh, that was it, yeah. But I remember I wrote chapter, 6 or something, and you'd either written chapter 5 or chapter 7. But I'd paid no attention to anyone else because I was very egotistical back then. So yeah. I read the first bit, and then I don't think I read any of the other people who were writing it. So I didn't know until we reconnected that we'd actually both written part of the same story.
I recall both of those chapters or elements of the story as being quite gory. So.
We probably both did the gories too.
The very gory.
I think some nuns exploded.
Yes, yeah.
Something to do with us being taught by nuns at one point.
I do remember seeing your name though and thinking, that couldn't be the Mike that I I went to school with, could it? That would be a weird coincidence. I bet he is a writer, though.
So why don't you guys tell us about your collaborative process? Or, Mike, how do you collaborate with people?
I browbeat them until they realise that I'm affected everything that I say, and they have to... It varies from project to project. I mean, it helps an awful lot if I'm already friends with people, I have to admit. Simply because, as I was saying with Dave, you've got the same shorthand, so it just saves an awful lot of time. You can, especially working with Steve, because we like a lot of obscure stuff, so I don't have to hold his hand and kind of take him down a lane pointing stuff out and how it got there, and he just knows. So that speeds things up somewhat. With other people, there's a reason we're working together, so that's kind of what I focus on. Anything that pushes the story forward. I mean, I'm a narrative guy, not a visual guy, not a sound guy, really. So my main concern is just making sure that the story works, and everything else that gets brought to that has to kind of keep the momentum going. As long as the story gets pushed forward and there's enough pizza for everyone to eat, I'm happy.
Yeah, pizza is a running theme. Coming back to collaboration and Vortex, there's also a John Carpenter composition on Lost Themes called Vortex. Is there a connection between the two?
Yeah, well, this thing didn't have a title for the longest time when we first started working on it. And I was listening to John's music almost exclusively when we started the project, just to kind of get me in that zone. A lot of old stuff, but the stuff that had just come out as well, which was Lost Themes. And I think the opening track is Vortex. It just worked. It just clicked. We needed something that kind of summed up the situation that these poor people were about to get themselves into. And that ended up working really well, like visually as well, once we had Dave on board. It just seemed like the perfect title. So I suggested it to John and Sandy, and we kind of like everyone's eyes lit up and said, oh, perfect. And the nice thing about that is it gave us a soundtrack to the book as well, which was neat.
If you had to pick a John Carpenter theme from one of the albums or soundtrack, which one would you go for? I'm
very fond of Escape from New York. I really like Prince of Darkness. And I probably listen to The Fog more than any other. That stuff's, I mean, it's just on repeat all the time, along with, the Morricone Thing soundtrack as well. I mean, the nice thing about John is that the new stuff is just as good as the classic stuff as well. So, I mean, he hasn't done a bum soundtrack yet. So
he's having this great second career. I mean, we've been to see him together a couple of times. Puts on a great show and looks like he's loving the rock star lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge element of it. I mean, I think he was quite nervous, the idea of doing it all at first, like taking a band on the road and stuff. But the band is partly family. His son and godson are in there. So it's that family thing of having fun together and enjoying what they do. And I've been lucky enough because before the world kind of fell over on its side, I used to go to LA quite a bit and hang out with John and Sandy. They used to let me stay in the guest house. So I was kind of privy to seeing a lot of this stuff come together. So, listening to them rehearse or being invited into the studio when they were putting the album down. I'm not a musician, so I don't know what's going on when I see people sat behind the desk and all those dials. But I get to hear how a song kind of starts and where it ends up, and so that side of it has been fascinating. And then going to see him and getting to hang out backstage and stuff is always cool as well. So again, I've just been extremely lucky.
Does it feel like a dream job sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, it like I was a huge fanboy right up until I think the second time that I met him. And again, I've been lucky enough to be hanging with John when other people get invited to meet him for the first time properly. And I get to see how they act, and it's exactly the way I acted the first time I met him. It's overwhelming. Once you get that out of your system, you then start talking about the things that you're going to do together, and it's like working with anyone else. Except every now and again there'll be like a pinch me moment when John will pass some pages back and say he really enjoyed reading it, and you can't help but feel slightly weirded out that this is the guy that made the thing has just said that. The piece of work that you've written is yeah. I don't think that ever really goes away, but I think what it adds to it is, and I think Dave's talked about this on some of the comic podcasts that he's done, the awareness that you're allowed to play in John Carpenter's universe. You make sure that the stuff that you're doing is not only at the top of your game, you have to make sure that it works for John and Sandy as well. So it just makes everything that goes through that system just strive a little bit harder maybe than you would elsewhere.
What are some things that you have to think about when you're doing different media? I mean, like, for example, with comic books, you have to have quite really short, sort of pithy sentences that sort of give an essence of a character or give an essence of the story.
The nice thing about comic book scripts is there isn't a single way to do them. That's very different with screenplays, where there sort of is a single way to do them. There's quite a strict format, and you can have a lot of fun within that format. But with comic books, I mean, I taught myself how to write a comic book just from reading other comic book scripts, which at the time when I started a few years ago, there weren't that many around to read. They're quite hard to get hold of, unless it was something that was like in an Alan Moore collection or something, and then you're just suddenly reading the best. You know, you're not seeing idiots making mistakes. Most of the formats are different. As long as it works between you and the artist, getting the idea across, the comic book script format doesn't really matter. And again, there's such a wide range of books out now that are not necessarily genre stuff, kind of like diary-centric, I guess, where, you know, you can have pages of just talking heads and the speech bubbles can be huge and fill up most of the page, most of the panel. The stuff that we do tends to be more cinematic in nature. There's a lot more kind of visual eye candy on display. So you're very aware that the more that you write dialogue, the more that speech bubble is going to obscure the stuff that's going on. But to be honest, that's almost second nature from writing screenplays, because it's the same deal. You've got to keep everything short and snappy, mostly, in the dialogue. So it wasn't a huge difference between doing the screenplays and the comic scripts, to be honest. And in fact, it's the other way now with me. If I write prose fiction, I find it very hard to expand stuff. I feel like, oh, that's too much detail. You know, I had a short story published a few years ago, and the main, not criticism, but most of the feedback on it was how short and snappy everything was. And I didn't waste any space. And that's just now second nature. I think the very first script that I wrote, the biggest note I got back on it was that there was too much ink on the page. Yeah. And that's something that I've always kept kind of in my top pocket. And, you know, whenever writers ask for advice and stuff who are just starting out, that's usually the advice that I give them. Because every script I read by a new writer tends to be overly written, which is fine, because you know, we call it a puke draft. It's, you just got to get everything out and on the page and get to the end, and then you can say you're finished. And all writing is rewriting, so you just keep kind of chewing that up and spitting it out until you get it down to what you need. Now I'm at the stage where I can write quite short, piffy stuff, and it is closer to the mark than it used to be. There's still quite a few revisions there. What I find, and this works a little bit in comics, but it's more in screenplays, is you have to finish a page at a certain point, so there's nothing hanging over on the next page. It's got to be a fun read for the reader, especially in scripts, because if you don't get their attention, they stop reading and move on to the next one. You know, if you're building up to the end of a big sequence, you need it to finish at the bottom of that page, not to be a line over on the top of the next page. So then you've got to go back and remove stuff so that line falls at the bottom of the page. So it's just a formatting thing. And you find people who are new to it then try and mess around with font sizes and things to try and get everything on the same page. But it's getting rid of orphan words that are stuck on the end of a sentence that turn one sentence into two, but the second line is just a single word. So you're constantly rearranging the structure of what you're saying or describing, or what the character's saying, so that it just flows better on the page and looks better on the page. There's always a point when I finished something that, say, a comic script of mine is about 24 pages. when I've got to the end of it, it's usually about 26, and then I've got to go back and find 2 pages of stuff to remove. Or sometimes in that redraft, I will find something I've given a single panel to probably deserves maybe a single page, in which case I then have to find an entire page to cut somewhere else so that Dave can do that big hero shot or explosion or face falling off or whatever it is that we've decided is more important.
I have a question about sentence structure, and sometimes with songwriting, you have to make sure that everything is sayable. Do you ever sort of go through it and speak it yourself? And does that help you?
It's more with screenplays than comic scripts that you have to get everything sounding right out loud. I tend to read scripts out loud more than I do the comic stuff. But part of the process is going over pages again and again, and I'll probably just pace the room. I have a hammer that I carry, so I kind of swing that around until I get something right. Names are tricky, I find. My first drafts, I just use whatever comes into my head, at the time, and just move on. I don't care what any of these people are called until I start revising. When I start reading after I finish something, I'll realize that everyone's name begins with J. So you've got to make sure that all the names are different and everyone's clearly identifiable. So that's a big part of it.
But coming back to music and sound, which is sort of a very loose theme, I thought I'd ask for some recommendations. It's a pretty broad ask. What would you like somebody listening to this to go and check out that maybe they hadn't checked out before?
Music-wise, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm going through every heavy metal release from 1987. What was I listening to? I was listening to the Ozzy Osbourne tribute album with Randy Rhoads, which I think was released in 87. And the next thing I played just happened to be from 87. And I just decided to go down that path, and that was about a week and a half ago.
How's that affecting your writing then, Mike?
My writing is very thrashy at the moment, I guess.
Lots of mullets in your characters as well.
God.
No, but King Diamond, has great narrative stuff going on, and concept albums and range and high-pitched squeaky stuff, and just great stuff. But I won't push that onto anyone because it's a very acquired taste. Other part of your question, a film that gets an awful lot of people talking about it because it's absolutely brilliant is Mad Max Fury Road. And I think one of the things they don't talk about enough is the sound design on it. And I think they don't talk about it because it's absolutely perfect and they don't really notice it. None of that soundscape is in any way natural, but it all works. Him crunching a scorpion or whatever to the sound of everything else that goes on in there is got to be created from nothing. And it's almost a cliche now because you talk about the T-Rex in Jurassic Park that was made up out of all these different animals to try and find out what a T-Rex would sound like. I think they did a similar process for Fury Road where all of the vehicles had a distinct personality which came through the sound of the engine and the roar as it moved along the road or the sand or whatever it was going over. Each vehicle had a slightly different animal attached to it. And I think when they destroyed a vehicle, they actually used the sounds of those animals dying recorded from kind of wildlife documentaries or whatever, mixed in with, the sound of the metal and everything else that you'd expect. It's just that level of detail that they went into, I think fascinates me. And I'm constantly noticing new stuff about Fury Road, and I think that probably the sound design is the most underrated aspect of it because the visuals are so kind of overwhelming. I think we've talked about it before, but because we're so ancient, and Dave, we grew up with stuff before there was VHS even. Mm-hmm. So I think all of us had probably the same crappy tape deck with a C60 cassette in. And when something was coming on TV, like it was a big bank holiday movie, you would hold the crappy little microphone next to your crappy little speaker on your crappy little TV and press play and record, and you would fill your tape with the sound of certain movies. And then the next time you wanted to watch them, you would lie in bed with your eyes closed, with your crappy headphone on, single mono earpiece in one ear, and you would listen to Star Wars.
That sounds a really interesting idea. I would never have thought to do
so
that.
You get a completely different experience because there's whole sections with no dialogue, and it's just sound effects, or not even music, just sound effects. And it's a fascinating way to kind of experience it. But we did that growing up just out of unsatisfied lust for rewatching stuff that we couldn't get a hold of again.
I remember doing the version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with, I think, Kirk Douglas.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think it was on one Christmas, and I was doing exactly that, holding the cassette player up to the mono speaker on the TV and just recording it. But my mom was saying, I think she was thinking in a different way, that this couldn't be played to somebody who hadn't seen the film. She said, they won't know what's happening. You have to narrate it. So I had this cassette somewhere of, now they're getting out at boat, climbing on submarine. There's a massive squid.
Oh my God. So funny.
The olden days of cassettes.
I was just thinking, you had to kind of rely on your ingenuity to experience an art form. Like, you guys are talking about Star Wars and really re-listening to those and experiencing them using a different sense to revisit them. I wonder how that's affected. I mean, firstly, the fact that you had access to boredom, which...
There was plenty of that.
Because you're bored, you have to sort of be creative to sort of entertain yourself. And I always say that's a really good way to sort of generate creativity. But experiencing all the senses in a different way, do you think that has impacted your writing ability?
I think it's twofold, because the first part of that is there was a restriction that we had that I think especially kids today, because I've got two kids of my own, and they can watch anything they want anytime they want. We didn't have that. We had a slot of children's TV. We had slots of stuff that appealed to people like me and Steve. And I think around us, we were surrounded by people who would just watch anything. I wasn't that person. I wanted to watch Monkey at 6 o'clock on BBC Two. And if I missed that, it was a bad week for everyone around me, because it was the only thing like it. I couldn't watch the stuff that other people were watching because it didn't push the same buttons.
Which reminds me of the other thing that we used to share, which was cassette recordings of the Friday Rock Show.
The wonderful thing about something like the Friday Rock Show is the range of music was so big. You were constantly discovering something you'd never heard before. And it was either a brand new release that was coming out of LA, or it was something you'd never heard from 10 years before you were born that was already a classic, but you were listening to it for the first time. And that, again, pushed all the same buttons for me, but listening to any other radio show didn't. So while all my friends at school were listening to Radio 1 all the time, I only had 2 hours on a Friday night. That was it. I couldn't listen to pop music. It wasn't as good. It wasn't the same. The beginning of that fandom thing where you start drilling down into the specific thing that you're really into, rather than this broad expanse of music that was out there, but I just had no interest in finding out about, because I'd never heard an Ozzy Osbourne song before, so now I wanted every Ozzy Osbourne album that there was. So that would be my mission for the next few weeks. So I didn't have time to listen to the Smiths or whatever the hell everyone else was going on about back in that period. You end up looking at stuff, especially when you're doing research for projects, in a way that it wasn't originally intended for. And I know, again, I put Dave through hell because I asked him to draw the inside of bodies. He has to go away and actually look at kind of like medical stuff that's quite icky. It's designed and it's online because there's some doctor trying to build a career. So Dave can draw what the inside of a rib cage looks like if you were looking out from it.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And of course, you already knew that from Carcass album covers.
That when we were growing up, it's more about taking something from one arena and pulling it into the thing that you need it to do. I'm not into cars. I couldn't name a car, know nothing about them, but I have folders of cars that I think look great, and that ends up being used in spaceship design. Or if I need a hero to have a certain type of car, then I'll be like, the cool blue one. And whoever I'm working with will say, oh, you mean the 74 Mustang? And I'll be like, no idea what that means. The cool blue one, please. I don't have the vocabulary for all of that stuff, but, you know, I know what I like.
I've had a car sound design memory of working with you.
Oh, yeah.
So we had the location recording of the car. It was like a Mercedes sports car, if you remember. It's supposed to tear in.
Yeah, it was rubbish.
And you were like, that car doesn't sound good. It sounds too soft. And I kept beefing it up. And you kept going, no, do it again.
All right, yeah.
And I ended up like I merged, I can't remember how many cars, and obviously had to sort of morph them all together. And then I actually dug out some recordings of Panthers roaring and dubbed that in. And I was like, Mike, I think I've got it for you. And you were like, I'm done with that now. Mike, it's been absolutely brilliant catching up with you. Before we let you go, where can our listeners find you online?
I'm constantly building a website. I think it sort of looks okay at the moment, but there's very little material on it. But I think that's MikeSizemore.com.
Right, MikeSizemore.com.
But to be honest, the easiest way is just on Twitter. I'm at Sizemore. That's like where I hang out more than anything else. Yes, I'm very approachable on the Talk to Anyone. So that's probably the first port of call. And then eventually, at some point this year, I'll have more writing stuff up on the website because my old one fell over and then I forgot about it for 2 years. So I'm just rebuilding everything at the moment.
And Anikó, where can we find you?
I'm at Coco Vocals and at cocovocals.com.
Well, thanks again to Mike, and I hope we can get you back sometime and chat a bit more. Maybe throw you in a room with Dave.
I hope you find at least 15 minutes of this are usable.
Okay, well, thanks again, Mike. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.